Meanwhile, the South African agricultural sector has made a clarion call that it should be exempted from the ongoing load shedding. This comes after a recent statement by Chris Hatting, the head of policy analysis at the Center for Risk Analysis, that the agricultural industry is being adversely impacted by the ongoing power outages, with farmers bracing themselves for the impact of ongoing interrupted power on production schedules, revenue, and sensitive electronic equipment. The agricultural sector most affected by load shedding is dairy farms that are highly mechanized with electricity required for most of their production. Others include fruit and vegetable farms, poultry farms, and crop farmers who cannot use their electric pumps for irrigation. In this situation, a group, Dear SA, has initiated a campaign to assess public opinion about the request that farmers should be excluded from load shedding. Now, the CEO of Dear South Africa, Gideon Joubert, joins me now on the news. Gideon, welcome to News Central Now. Thank you so much for joining me. All right, so your group, Dear South Africa, is looking to find sort of maybe it's a consensus or differing opinions from the public in South Africa on this request for the agricultural sector to be excluded or exempted from load shedding. So far, what have you found?
So at the moment, the campaign is really in its infancy. It's just about started, and we're hoping to get it up to a very high level of public participation. Typically, in cases like this, where the problem is well publicized, we're aiming for between 50,000 to 100,000 unique comments, although we've had far more than those for other more sort of high public knowledge campaigns. But a decent number of public inputs would be around the 100,000 mark, and then we can be able to assess where the public sentiment lies and then take those results and present them directly to Parliament for further action. And hopefully, if the wish of the general public is that the agriculture should be exempted from rolling blackouts, then that is something I think that's very worth pushing for, especially with the potential consequences of the ongoing problem.
And that's where I want us to go next in terms of the consequences. When we talk about the reality of food security as a result of load shedding, how close do you think South Africa could be to a situation of food insecurity if no measures are taken immediately?
I think it's walking a knife edge at the moment, because from all the indicators we've received from the various agricultural institutions, agricultural unions, as well as from the Center of Risk Analysis and other organizations keeping a close eye on the problem, you've already pointed out that, we have four sectors that are most heavily impacted by this, which is dairy farming, poultry farming, fruit and vegetable farming, as well as any sort of crop farming that's heavily dependent on irrigation, which is a fair amount in South Africa. It's a relatively arid country, and we are quite heavily dependent on irrigation in some areas for those crops not to fail. And those are all energy intensive processes. So with the rolling blackouts having had extensive disruptions of those sectors and of those industries, we are already witnessing difficulty of getting food reliably into retailers. We've also seen, apart from the agricultural sector itself being directly affected by this, we've seen disruptions all along the cold chain, all the way from production to the final point of consumption. And this has had extremely negative consequences for reliability of food and therefore food security. So it's a problem that has potential crisis implications.
But interesting enough, if the agricultural sector is able to get some kind of exclusion or exemption from the load shedding, aren't you concerned that it might necessarily open the floodgates? Maybe not floodgates, but it would open the gates to have other sectors that are also vital to South Africa making these same requests. The mining sector is one that has also been heavily hit. There's employment issues to consider with mining industries and mining subsectors possibly not being able to rise above the load shedding situation. So is that not a concern?
It's definitely a concern. And if you look at the origins of the problem with load shedding in South Africa, is the sense that we've had failure baked into the model of electricity generation and distribution in South Africa right from the start of the state having the monopoly on it. We've already had, in essence, an admission by the government that this model has failed, and that since we are in a presently declared state of disaster pertaining to the rolling blackouts, the government has admitted that the answer lies with private procurement. So hopefully calls like this can also be used to speed up that process of deregulating and breaking that monopoly, so we can have private sector energy providers and distributors stepping into the vacuum and hopefully increasing our capacity for generating and supplying electricity, because as you rightly pointed out, this could be a domino effect and it's a whole house of cards that can come falling down. But equally so, we're having certain sectors that are pretty much vital, not just to the economy, but also to social stability, as well as people being able to keep themselves alive, that are being heavily impacted by this crisis.
All right, Gideon, before I let you go, these rollouts, the load shedding, it's been in place almost about a decade now in South Africa, and it hit the worst stages last year and it's continued into this year. But the president just very recently announced a new minister of electricity, adding that position to his cabinet. Some have said it just at the end of the day just adds more people, but there are not enough officials actually taking responsibility for fixing South Africa's electricity problem. I wonder if you've been able to take some sort of analysis on what the public feels about a new minister of electricity and really the acceptability and the accountability of who needs to fix the power situation.
So the new Minister of Electricity hasn't received, I think, the warmest of welcomes, and it's very understandable. South Africa has one of the most bloated cabinets in the world. I think we've got a larger government than the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and probably the United States itself. And these political positions have not led to a more beneficial or better rollout of basic service delivery. In fact, things have deteriorated quite markedly, and especially since 2015, when rolling blackouts first became a real significant problem, it has very much intensified. And last year, we did indeed have our worst year by far, and 2023 looks to be exponentially worse. So I think the sentiment for the general public is that the solution lies away from government and not within government.
All right, so we'll leave the conversation at that. Gideon Joubert, CEO of Dear South Africa, thank you so much for joining me on the news.
Thank you as well.